I'm in a small town in Northern California, and I'm on a hunt for something. What I like about this motif is just the simple grouping of light values and the grouping of dark values of the foliage behind. And I want to group those into almost like a yin-yang design, so that all of the darks are together, the lights are together, and they intersect in an interesting way. Here's where I begin. Watercolor paper, a graphite pencil, and an attempt to map out the big shapes and make sure they fit in the picture. Here's the car, the house, but as I'm doing this, I'm thinking about the light areas and the dark areas behind them, the trees and that shadowed porch. And I'm trying to think how I'm going to approach this as I go. I'm not sure what I'll do with the colors. I'll think about the value first and then figure out if I want to play with warm and cool or local color or whatever. I could do it as just black and white, and that would work, I think. Now the time of day is nearly noon, so the light is moving to the west, and it'll change a bit, but hopefully it'll stay close to the way it is here when it starts. So I'll go with a white and black gouache, but use a transparent red oxide and yellow ochre, a dull red and dull yellow, to warm up the black. I want to use a red filter to extract all of the variations of color and see it monochromatically in red or magenta. I've squeezed out the colors onto a metal tin, and I'm using a large, flat synthetic brush to place some warm color over the light areas. I want to get rid of the pure white because I can come back to that with white gouache later. But I want my light areas to be just slightly warm, kind of like an old faded photograph. Next, I want to drop that inky black into a little sea of water, like an octopus hiding itself in a cloak of ink. I'm using a lot of water here, and I want it to pool up. And I don't mind if it spills over into those light areas a bit. At this early stage of a picture, I can allow the painting to be much wetter and more big shapes. In Sebastopol, north of San Francisco, there are a lot of artists and a lot of electric cars. And some of the folks who own homes in Sebastopol are helping to house people who were displaced by the fires in Santa Rosa and Healdsburg and Paradise. So you might see a few accessory dwellings or trailers in back or in front. Now I've made the big statement lightly so far, the big dark areas grouped together, the light areas, but I'm stating them lightly at first and then adding some darks while it's still wet. And the fun of watercolor in its transparent form is the way it grows and flows on the page. It's alive on the page. Now let me define a few terms for those of you who are more new to painting. I mentioned values or value, and that means simply the light or dark tone of a color. I mentioned local color, and the local color is the intrinsic color of the surface itself, independent of the lighting that's on it. And I also mentioned warm and cool. Most colors, relative to other colors, are either warmer, that is more toward orange, or cooler, which means more towards blue. Now look at those deep shadows under the chairs on the front porch. That's all rich darks that are softly blending into each other. Lola Merlin Strip says, how do you decide between gouache and watercolor? Does it depend on the subject matter, the practicalities, or just your mood? Well, you know, there's not that much difference between watercolor and gouache in tube form. You can use gouache transparently, like I'm doing so far, and the procedure changes once you introduce the white. The only difference is that if I was doing this in transparent watercolor only, I'd have to be careful to save out the white areas of the paper for the brilliant lights on the top of the car and on top of that pile of gravel on the left. I'm going to come back and do those in gouache though instead. So while I'm still in transparent watercolor, I'm trying to group all this dark area together into one mass. This was popular among American illustrators like Howard Pyle. Look at the light area of her costume in the wall and the dark area of the table and the guy's costume. Same thing with British muralist Frank Brangwyn. The light figure against the light background and then the dark areas all together. Using this device, you can have a lot of figures and a lot of detail, but still a very simple overall effect. So this subject matter lends itself pretty well. I got those light areas, the building and the car, and then those dark areas, the porch and the trees. I'll try to keep those together. And I've done an abstract simplification here so that you can see the abstract idea that I have in my mind, the little spots of dark in the light and maybe a few spots of light in the dark. I don't want to overdo that though. I want to kind of sweep together all these dark areas together and sweep all these light areas together. Liv Erickson wonders, for the cover on the car, did you paint a midtone and then add the highlights, or the other way around? In other words, highlight color for the mask, then the midtones on top. It's really more the second of those two. I started with that light tone, and I'm just lightly brushing in darks over that. Now to do the foliage, I've got two things in mind. I can't use green because I don't have green. Maybe I can use black and a little yellow ochre. And the second thing is I don't want to go too light in those tree areas. And so I have a semi-transparent dry brushing of the textures to get a broken up edge similar to the foliage. Now here's one of those spots within the light area, the windows. They're covered with screens. They have some trim in the middle of them. I'll do the simple dark shape first. And I can square up the edges of the windows after painting the darks. I'll square them up by using some nice, thick, juicy white paint with a little yellow ochre. This is on the tip of a long round, a very long fibered brush. What size brushes are you using? Do you have a favorite brand of brush? No, I mean, I'll use any brand if it's got good construction. I use the Richardson Travel set. I have links below in the description of the YouTube video that has links to Amazon of the brushes I'm using. But generally I like to have a 3/4 inch or inch flat brush and a smaller 1/4 inch flat, and then a couple of round brushes, including one that's bigger, and a few very thin, long fibered brushes like this one. Do you use any special techniques to paint the siding of the house? Asks Matt Stewart. Well, Matt, you probably noticed how I used a straight edge to draw the convergence of lines to the vanishing point on the left of this shiplap siding. And now I'm painting, leaving just that lighter edge of the paper showing through with a slightly buff colored stroke. And now I'm painting the bottom edge of the shiplap. Shiplap, by the way, unlike clapboards, which are made of wedge-shaped pieces, the vertical surfaces are parallel, and there's that rabbit cutout for the top surface, which is catching the light, and then the cast shadow of the bottom surface. That cast shadow is not too dark, so I'm trying to keep it fairly light. Connor asks, what's the general idea behind maintaining the relationship of hue and value between the window trim and the siding for the passage in the sun and the passage in the shade? Well, it seems like the siding is a little bit darker, kind of a buff-colored tan compared to the trim, which is more of a bright white. So I want to keep that half-step relationship both in the sunlight and in the shadow. Now Dorothy asks, you posted a tutorial on impasto with oil paint a while ago. Does that also work with gouache? Well, you can build up the texture of gouache a bit, but not as much as you can in oil. So I'm trying to suggest texture by dry brushing instead. Now there's that cast shadow from the wheelie bin, as they call it in Britain, and then the curb's edge. There's a lot of other information that I'm not getting. There's a planter and there's a lot of chairs in there. Christina says, what do you think is the right amount of detail? Well, as much as you can get in the time that you have is, I guess, the best answer. And not all of this detail is that relevant. I don't need to show all of the stuff that I can see with my eyes. I just want to keep this dark, soft, and unified so that we can focus our attention more on the big relationships. I forgot to bring my easel, so I have to kind of hold up the painting to compare it to the subject and see what I may have forgotten to include. The folks, by the way, that live there kind of waved to me earlier and didn't seem to mind me doing a sketch of their house. I was kind of hoping they'd come over and say hi, but I think there are a lot of artists around here, so they didn't bat an eyelash. Now that transparent red oxide, this was a payoff stroke, was putting the top surface of the rooftops, which had a kind of a reddish color, in with that brush. And I want to put a few weeds in there, kind of dried up looking weeds in the yard. And I'll just do that with a split brush technique. So how are you doing, Jeanette?
I'm doing fine. I think we found a nice motif here on the streets of Sebastopol. I like this cute little travel trailer and the house it's parked in front of, and those palm trees are magnificent. I am putting my travel brushes back together without messing up the hairs. Okay, it's a hand-eye coordination thing. Sometimes I just spit on them.
Okay, thanks for watching. You might want to check out my website or subscribe to my channel. And then here's a playlist with more good stuff and a video that continues the story. So check them out and share with your friends.